For 2 decades, SpaceX did one thing better than any government on Earth. It launched rockets, more of them, more often, and more cheaply than China, Russia, or any legacy contractor in the United States. That was the whole story. Then, in the spring of 2026, the company filed its S-1, and the filing described a different business, a $55 billion chip plant outside Austin, a reported $15 billion a year compute contract with an AI lab the CEO had publicly called evil, nearly $3 billion earmarked for gas turbines, a worker dead at Starbase days before a launch the company chose not to delay, and a $4.16 billion Pentagon contract, awarded by an administration whose officials, according to disclosures reviewed by Gizmodo, held equity in the company they were doing business with. The launches kept happening. The press releases kept arriving. Almost nobody outside the filing rooms was reading the rest of the document. To understand what's happening now, you have to understand how completely SpaceX won. Founded in 2002, mostly dismissed for a decade by people with much nicer offices. Then it landed a booster on a drone ship in the middle of the Atlantic, and the conversation changed. Reused boosters, station resupply contracts, commercial satellites, classified military payloads. By 2026, according to publicly reported launch manifests, SpaceX is conducting more orbital launches per year than every other provider on the planet combined, public, private, foreign, and domestic. Starlink became the largest satellite constellation ever flown. Starship V3 completed Flight 12, and engineers noted that the new heat shield performed better than internal models had projected. There was no real competitor left in the launch market, and that, quietly, became part of the problem. Somewhere between Flight 10 and Flight 12, the internal language started shifting. According to people familiar with SpaceX's investor materials, pitch decks that once led with launch cadence began leading with compute capacity. In Memphis, the company spun up a data center campus branded Colossus, first built for XAI, now contracted out to a third party. In Austin, SpaceX moved forward with what it calls Terafab, a chip manufacturing project with a projected cost, according to reporting from the New York Times and CNBC, of at least $55 billion. Then came the deal that didn't make sense on its own terms. Anthropic, the AI lab Musk had spent the previous year publicly attacking, including a since-deleted post in which he said the company hates Western civilization, agreed to pay roughly $15 billion a year for access to SpaceX's data centers. The figure was first reported by The Verge and is referenced in the IPO filing itself, so the Mars program now shared a balance sheet with a chip foundry, a power generation business, and a customer the founder had publicly called evil 6 months earlier. While capital flooded into chips and compute, the rocket started accumulating liabilities the launches couldn't outrun. In May 2026, days before Flight 12, a worker died at Starbase. OSHA opened an investigation. SpaceX has not publicly detailed the circumstances. The launch went ahead on schedule. Around the same time, residents in the small Texas communities near Boca Chica filed suit. The complaint alleges that repeated Starship liftoffs and landings caused structural damage to nearby homes, cracked drywall, broken windows, and what one filing describes as ground vibration, severe enough to dislodge fixtures from interior walls. The most powerful flying machine ever built was, it turned out, also being fired a few miles from people's living rooms, then the gas turbines. The IPO filing discloses a commitment of nearly $3 billion to fossil fuel generators to power the AI data center build-out, at a moment when the EPA and several state regulators have signaled increased scrutiny of behind-the-meter gas generation for AI compute. None of this stopped the launches. All of it now sits inside the same legal entity preparing to go public. SpaceX had a choice. It could have spun out the AI infrastructure. It could have separated the proven, dominant, world-leading launch business from the speculative bet on chips, compute, and gas-fired data centers. Different entities, different governance, different risk for different investors. It chose not to. Every one of those businesses, Terafab, Colossus, the Anthropic contract, the gas turbines, the Mars program, the Golden Dome satellites, went into a single entity. One stock, one CEO, one bet. Then came the disclosure that drew most of the legal commentary. According to reporting by Gizmodo, several Trump administration officials held significant equity in SpaceX and the affiliated company XAI ahead of the planned IPO, the same administration that, weeks earlier, had awarded SpaceX a $4.16 billion contract, confirmed by the U.S. Space Force and first reported by Bloomberg, to build the missile-tracking satellites for the Golden Dome defense system. A defense contract, an IPO. Officials with equity in the company receiving the contract, same quarter. To be clear, SpaceX has not been accused of wrongdoing, and no formal conflict of interest action has been announced. But the pattern, on a public company road to listing, is the kind that historically attracts questions from the SEC, congressional committees, and inspector general offices long before it attracts subpoenas. There has been no collapse. By almost every measurable metric, SpaceX is still winning. The rockets fly, the constellation grows, the contracts arrive on schedule. But the pattern is familiar to anyone who has studied how dominant American companies lose their edge. Boeing was, for decades, the safest commercial aircraft manufacturer in the world. The 737 MAX crashes did not happen in a single boardroom decision. They happened over years of small drifts, engineering compromises, regulatory shortcuts, financial priorities that no individual inside the building thought were dangerous yet. Intel chased margins instead of process and lost a generation to TSMC. GE drifted from turbines to finance and never fully came back. Each time, the warning signs were dismissed because the core business was still printing money. SpaceX is now, simultaneously, a launch provider, a satellite operator, a telecom, a chip manufacturer, a data center operator, a power buyer, a defense contractor, and the vehicle for a planned crewed Mars flyby, a mission, the company has confirmed, that will be commanded by a crypto billionaire whose identity and qualifications have not been publicly detailed. Any one of these on its own would be one of the most ambitious corporate projects in the world. SpaceX is attempting all of them at once, while going public, and the reliance is not hypothetical. American military communications run on Starlink. American astronauts ride American rockets because of SpaceX. American missile defense, going forward, will sit on satellites SpaceX has not yet built. There is no second vendor waiting in the wings. Here is what the filing does not say out loud. SpaceX is asking public investors to fund the proposition that one person, already running a car company, a social network, an AI lab, a brain implant startup, and a tunneling firm, can also oversee the world's dominant launch provider, the world's largest satellite constellation, a $55 billion chip plant, a multi-billion-dollar data center business, a defense relationship with a politically aligned administration, and a crewed mission to Mars. That list is in the prospectus, not implied, disclosed. The drone ship landings were supposed to be impossible. The reused boosters were supposed to be impossible. The Starship heat shield was, by most engineering standards, impossible. Maybe this is impossible too, and maybe it works anyway. But every great American corporate decline shares a quiet origin, the moment a company stops being defined by what it was best at and starts being defined by what its founder wanted next. After the IPO, the people who find out first will no longer be the engineers in Hawthorne or the crews working under the lights at Starbase. It will be the public, the same public that depends on those rockets to defend the country, connect the grid, and on most days, hold the sky together.